All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Megan Hillukka. Megan, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
All right. So Megan is a grieving mother with 6 children, 5 of whom are still here. Megan encourages and supports grieving mothers to know that despite having gone through an unimaginable experience, that life is not over for them. Megan experienced PTSD after finding her daughter, Aria, when she died. And Megan's done the work to find healing in her brain and in her life. Because of this, Megan wants everyone to know that PTSD is not a life sentence and that healing is possible. Again, Megan, thank you so much for doing this. Share with our listeners before we get started here where you're from originally and where you're calling from, and then let's dive in.
I'm from Minnesota, and so that's where I am today. I haven't moved far. So
okay.
Yeah, around the Twin Cities.
Yep. I can hear that accent. So yeah. I mean, come on, there's no way to cut this. I mean, this topic is it's so unimaginably tragic. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to have you recount your story, but in lieu of doing that, I guess the question is, many of us probably most of us experience some degree of trauma. Obviously this mm-hmm. is way up there. How did you get to this point where, and maybe we'll double back, but how did you get to this point where you're like, you know what, I want to reach out. I want to create a resource. I want to start helping people.
A lot of work. It's a lot of work to get where I'm at. But I'm actually fine recounting my story if you want me to say a little bit about it. I mean, I've said it enough times, and I think you start to feel like people are like, you're so emotionless about your story, but I'm like, it starts to become your life and what it is. And so it's not like, I can just share a little bit about it if you want me to.
Okay. Yeah.
So May 27th of 2016, so it's been a little bit over like 3.5 years. I found my daughter, Aria, after she died in the night. She was 15 months old and she died in her sleep of SUDC, so it's sudden unexplained death in childhood. So it's similar to SIDS, but it's after they turn a year, it turns into SUDC. And I feel like I lost myself and my brain, my mental health. Like in that moment, I can still, like that moment, I like feel like all my circuits in my brain, everything was just snapped in half. And so I've gone back to that moment so many times, but I didn't realize that I had any trauma until I was in therapy and my therapist mentioned that I might have PTSD. And then I started looking up the symptoms of PTSD, and a huge one is avoidance. And the one that I kept experiencing was like trying to go check on my boys, in the morning when they were sleeping still. And it got so bad where I couldn't even go downstairs. I was like heart pounding, my whole body's reacting every time I'm going to go check on them. And then in the morning, I began to just sit in my bed and not go downstairs. I couldn't bring myself to go check on my sleeping kids. Mm. And I felt like a terrible mom. I was like, what kind of mom, when she believes her kids are dead downstairs? Like, I honestly believed that in my brain and my body. Like, I was like, they're gone down there and I'm just sitting in my bed, too terrified to go down there.
How long after Aria had passed on are you talking about right now?
So this is within just a couple weeks, because my daughter Breland was born 4 weeks later. And so this specific memory is when I remember in between that time of Aria dying and Breland being born. And then Breland's birth and life was just another story of me. Like, I didn't sleep at all with her. I couldn't sleep because I would, lay her down and be like, okay, I'm going to put it in God's hands. There's nothing I can do. I can't control her living or dying. So I'd lay her down, try to put it not in my control, lay down. 5 minutes later, I'd pop up in a panic again, shaking her that, she's gone. So that's kind of my whole, and a very tiny example of what PTSD was like for me. Like, it's just that constant terror.
So you're going through this, you're having these experiences. At what point do you say, I need some help, or how did where did the therapist come in?
Immediately right when Aria died, I was like, you know what? I cannot do this alone. This feels too major and too big for me to be able to do myself. I need help.
Okay.
So I was open to therapy right away as soon as she died. And so I went to therapy, and we were just doing regular therapy. I think I started going after Breland was born. So like a month, 6 months or 6 weeks later or so. And I was telling her about, what I was experiencing, and she had suggested that I might have PTSD, and then referred me to a different therapist who does EMDR. So she didn't do EMDR, but he did. So that's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I'm sure everybody seems like people know about that, but
Mm-hmm.
not everybody does. But
Right.
yeah, so I went there to this other therapist who was very he was amazing. And so yeah, I started
Why?
EMDR.
What about him was amazing?
Um I feel like he was very gentle in his approach to EMDR. Like I've read from other people that their therapist has like forced them to try like remember things, and like tried to force them into a specific memory. And he was very gentle and like, wherever your brain goes, let's go there. Like I'm not going to tell you. He explained it a lot, like where he doesn't know where we're going, I don't know where I'm going, but we're going to shine a flashlight in the dark, and we're
Mm,
just trying to shine around. It's like we're this new thing that we're trying to discover within my brain.
mm.
And so it was very gentle. And then he always, every single time I left that office, I had hope. So when I was
Wow.
in the moment, like in his office was horrible. Like, I had so many, tears and bawling, and like so much stress in my chest, and just like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm doing this. This is horrible. And then every single time I left, I was calm. And like he always made sure we always went to like my calm place before we left
Right.
and boxed
Right.
it up. And so like when I left on my drive home, I was like, I got this. I can do this. I'm gonna get better. I can do this. Like I had hope
Awesome.
every single
Yeah.
time. So I just am really thankful that he was my therapist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, do you mind if I ask you? Do you have a partner?
Yeah,
Or
my
you?
husband.
Okay.
Yeah, Justin.
Okay. So you guys are going through this whole process. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so. I was before we jumped on here, I was looking at your website, and um, just for the audience's information, Mega has a podcast as well. You talk about, which I think is an amazing resource. I was looking through some of your the titles of your episodes, and I could just imagine how helpful this would be for a parent. I mean, this is of course a parent's worst
Hmm.
nightmare. So I mean, it just seems so. The questions I'm thinking about asking seem so trite. Really, they do. But
You can ask whatever you want. I'm
thank you,
very open to
thank you.
anything. Yeah.
So let's talk. You said you began to leave. You began to have hope.
Hmm.
Excuse me. So what did that look like? You leave the therapist's office. You get in the car. You're like, all right. I can do this. What goes on how do you deal? How does one deal? How did you deal?
Um, One of the biggest things for me was I was really motivated to get better. That was because, well, okay, so I had like two different things, separate things, PTSD and grief. So I had a trauma, and then I was also grieving. And then my trauma was almost um, re-experienced every moment of the day, because my trauma was sleep, and my kids have to sleep every single day. So I was re-experiencing my trauma over and over and over. But I think I knew that if I wanted to be the mom that I wanted to be, if I wanted to be able to, um, like, for example, it was quite a long time before my husband could leave me alone at home with the kids. If he were to go like on a work trip, I had to take all my kids and me and go to my mom and dad's. And I slept the night at my mom and dad's, and my mom checked on the kids all night because I couldn't look at them in the morning. So there's things that felt like my whole life was kind of like, like I couldn't be myself. I couldn't just go through my life on my own. I had to like oh, my husband's leaving. Now I have to like figure out what I'm going to do, because I can't be by myself.
Right.
I didn't want to live my life that way. I wanted to be able to be like the mom who can just take care of my kids. And so I think there was that driving motivation, obviously, to like learn how to live with this. And so I learned to sit with everything. I That hope to me was like in my head, always looking for, how can I do this better? How can I get better? Like my therapist said, that I always had like mini goals, like, be like 5 minutes. Okay, I want to leave Breland for 5 minutes and not check on her. And then once I get
Oh,
to 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, now I want to get to 15 minutes where I don't have to check on her in a panic. And then when I would get to 15 minutes, I was like, I can't believe I'm at 15 minutes. I want to get to 20 minutes. And sometimes I go back to 5 minutes and then I'd be mad. Like,
hmm.
I'm going backwards. But he always said that we're always taking steps in the right direction. We're always healing. And sometimes we might feel like we're stepping backwards. But I think that just wanting to learn how to live again, and that my life, I was only 23, I think, when she died. And I'm like, am I like, is this all my life is? Am I going to live the rest of my life in this trauma where my body is just reacting to, my kids sleeping, and then where I'm feel broken because my daughter died? It's a horrible place. And I'm still grieving. I'm never going to be done grieving. But when you do the work and you sit with the emotions and you work at rebuilding those pathways in your brain, and like, it's such a, I always feel like I was battling my mind. So like, it was so much work. And then when you do the work, you can find that hope.
Wow.
That's what I've
You,
experienced.
as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself that you're a pretty amazing person. I mean, seriously, to go through that and to get to a point where you're like, you know what? I mean, this is living. I mean, I would think it would be living hell, and yet
Mhm.
to have the wherewithal to say, I want to be better. I got other kids. I want to, and you go see a therapist and you start doing the work, and it's 5 minutes, and just these little micro goals, if you will. Is there something that you can look back to in your life? I mean, because you were young. I mean, 23. My
Mhm.
God, is there something that you can look back to in your life that you think kind of gave you the strength? I mean, because not everybody's going to do that.
You know, I don't really feel like that, or I don't really know, because I felt before Aria died, I felt emotionally broken. So
Before
even
Aria died.
before she died, I felt like if anything happens to me, I'm going to shatter. Like, I felt very insecure. I felt very, in many ways of my life, I was very um yeah, I don't even know how to describe it, but to the basis, I felt emotionally broken, where I didn't think I would have the strength. You don't really feel strong in those moments, because in your brain, or in my brain, I felt like this is what I have to do. That was just my deep feeling, was like, I don't have a choice. I have to go to therapy because I need the help. I
Right.
don't have a choice. I have to do this because I want to get better. And my therapist did remind me that, you know what? You do have a choice, and you are choosing to come here. He has other clients who chose to go gamble away their houses.
Well, that's what
So,
I'm kind of
yeah.
talking about. And I know everything's not black and white, and oftentimes it's not easy to say, oh, yes, my father
Hmm.
taught me this. But
Yeah.
I'm just curious. But it's interesting to note that even before this happened, you said you were emotionally broken. That
That's
was
what
kind of your,
yeah,
yeah.
that's what I
Wow.
felt like. And I think that this trial of losing Aria, it is obviously the most difficult thing I've ever experienced, and I don't wish it on anybody. But I feel like I've learned, it's forced me to take care of myself. It's forced me to start to look inward of myself, and do the work and take care of myself, and learn coping skills, coping mechanisms, learning how to deal with anxiety, and learning so much about how trauma and all of our life is stored in our body, and everything. It's just like, I feel like it's opened up a whole new world to me. And I don't think I would have even taken those steps if I hadn't experienced this trauma and loss. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything in my life that has taught me that. I just think felt broken, and now I feel a lot more emotionally stronger
Hmm.
because I've done the work, and because I've learned what feelings are and emotions are, and I've learned to notice in my body what I'm experiencing.
You said that the therapist who was practicing EMDR was
Hmm.
amazing. Just kind of want to go back to that. Obviously, people who are listening to this are therapists with all different levels of experience, students, etc. Talk a little bit more about um, what helped you with that therapist. You said the therapist was gentle. I
Hmm.
liked your image of. It sounded like he said we're both going to be shining this flashlight and
Hmm.
discovering. Talk more about what helped and what you
Hmm.
appreciated. I mean, that type of stuff, I
Hmm.
think, along with everything else you're saying, is going to be helpful for our listeners.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like almost like so many things what he said were like exactly what I needed to hear. And since I'm a person of faith, so I was like, I feel like God gave him words to like speak to me, because so many things, and I don't even think he was uh what do you say, focused in grief. Like that wasn't his expertise or like what he focused on, but he did EMDR with trauma. So
Right.
but he still was very good in so much of that. But I feel like so we did a lot of like going into my past and like allowing me to experience in my body. So like he would be like, okay, now I want you to, like, our first session was just like starting out, like trying to, whatever feeling comes up, try to just let your brain go to your past as far back as you can remember when you first felt that feeling in your body. And so we did a lot of exploring, I feel like that, like into my past. And there was two situations that came up in my therapy session that I didn't realize even had
Mm,
traumatized me a little bit. Like I didn't feel like they they left me traumatized that I noticed, but in those moments I was like, yeah, I did feel that at that time. One I had almost drowned, and one my mom had a seizure. So both of them are big things, but I didn't like, I kind of just moved on,
right.
from them. But we just did so much exploring, and then he did a lot of like asking me, one thing really quickly, a lot of people with EMDR do like the eyes moving,
Hmm.
and we did buzzers in my hands. And I really liked that. I feel like the eyes would distract me. And I feel like the buzzers, I was able to close my eyes and I just went into my body, into my head, and I like revisited in my brain. And then he would say, go wherever you go. And then he would stop the buzzers and I'd open my eyes. And I don't think everybody has to say, but I always told him what I was thinking and feeling. And then he would ask me, where are you feeling it in your body? So I feel like we always took what was going on in my head to what was going
Hmm.
on in my body, and we connected them. And I think that's so important because our bodies and our minds are not separate. They're,
Hmm.
a whole entity. And so like I always felt it in my chest, in my heart. I felt so much stress here, and then my neck and shoulders. And it felt like every time, I would go through that thought or what I was thinking, the experience, go through it. And then he would stop me before he got like, I would get to a red zone. So he like paid attention to my body and how I was reacting. And if I was going to get into a red zone, he would stop and then he would say, where are you feeling that in your body? And then I just focus on that. So I focus on, the stress in my chest. And the more I focused on it, the more it relaxed and disappeared.
Hmm.
And then once I was calm, and I was seriously like, went, from calm to stress to calm to stress, like many times in a session, because we, when you focus on it, we think that if we focus on it, it's going to get bigger, and it's gonna like ruin us and like whatever. But when we focus on it, it disappears. That's what I have noticed in therapy is, I focus on that spot in my chest, that stress,
Hmm.
and then it just relaxed and went out, and then we'd start all over. So yeah.
I just want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Megan Hillukka. Um, how talk about the evolution of your website and your podcast, and how did you get to a point? When did you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I want to do something and help other people with this?
Yeah, I remember when I was in therapy, I remember sitting there and thinking like, I want to help people. I want to help people with this, but I was like, there's no way I can. I don't, like I don't know how to, I don't have the energy. I don't even know what I'm experiencing. I don't know how to communicate that to the world. And then I had thought that the only way I could help people was to go to school to be a therapist. And I was like, I can't do that right now, do all that schooling, whatever. But as I was trying to figure out what can I do, like later on, so like a year ago, that's when I have started. Um, I started to think about what can I do? What have I experienced in my life that I can give to others to help them? And obviously, grief was and trauma. Trauma is something I'm really passionate about, and I talk about both of them. And then grief is something I'm more focused on with helping people. Um, but obviously, that's a huge thing in my life. And then I was struggling with like, do I want to dive into this area? Do I want to dive into something that's so heavy and so, like everybody has different triggers, everybody grieves differently. How can I connect those things and be able to support people in their grief wherever they're at? Because everybody's at a different spot, everybody's at a different, you know, we each of us has had a different way that our child died. And so then we have different feelings and emotions towards that. So I was like, I don't even know how to do this, but I feel like every step I've taken, I've just learned a little bit more and I've become more clear on what I'm doing. And I've also learned that I don't have to take everybody's grief onto myself, that everybody's grief is valid and real and I can sit with them, but I also don't need to carry it in my own life. And I've been better at being able to do that. Like I'm so honored when I get to hear people's stories and to sit with them and to hear their stories. I feel like I can be there. I can do that. I don't think I would have been able to before. And I don't know what changed. I don't know if it's just that I have more emotional capacity in myself and understanding of myself and who I am. But then I can sit with them, but then I can also like, okay, like separate my life and their life.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. And when I was in my deep grief, that made me angry because like I didn't like that other people could just go on with their lives. And here I was stuck in my, hole of grief and everyone else could just move along and go on with their lives. But I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important that we can support each other, have compassion, but we also can like go back and have the strength to be in our own lives as well.
Yeah, I mean that's beautifully said, and a really powerful lesson. I think that everybody listening to this needs to hear, to be able to sit with someone, listen to their story, which in this case is undoubtedly tragic, but to be able to go back into your own life and be able to live that life. That's not easy to do,
No, it's not.
right? It's not easy to do. I mean, you talk about it as if it just came. You talk about a lot of things like I mean seriously, like you're a pro. I mean, like you have a lot of experience in this, but how did you do that? How did you start? Well, before we do that, so you're thinking to yourself, all right, I want to help people, but there's I
Mm.
don't know how. So how did you? What did you do? What steps did you start to take?
I just started talking about it.
All
I
right.
I
Did you put up a
started
website
yeah,
and
I
started
started a
blogging?
website, I started blogging, I started Instagram, and I'm in a lot of Facebook groups with grieving moms and with PTSD Facebook groups as well. So I've done a ton of reading and books and just like being in that world, like sitting with reading what people are saying about grief, interacting with people who are on my website or listen to or look at my Instagram or now listen to my podcast. Um, I just started doing. I didn't even know what I was going to do for sure. In the beginning, I just started taking steps. And in the beginning, I didn't know how can I help? Like, I was like, I had no idea. I was like, how do you help somebody who's grieving? Like, you can't fix the problem. The problem is their child's dead and you can't, how do you fix that? You can't. So I've really honed in on to, I want to help moms who are like past that first shock of their, like child dying, and where they're kind of back to day life, and they're trying to figure out, who am I? Who have I become? I've changed. I'm a different person. And I don't even know how to love myself. I don't know how to live this life because it feels so heavy and broken, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so that's who I'm kind of focusing on, because I think that's the person I know how to help them, because I know it's possible to go from that spot to where I am. And
Well,
so
that in and of itself, I mean, to talk to you and just to hear your story is not only inspiring to me, but it's healing. You know, you've talked about a lot of things,
mhm,
Megan, that you know could take people a very long time. You know, you said you even before Aria's death, you were kind of emotionally broken, and
mhm,
then after this happened, um, obviously you were devastated, but then you got into therapy rather quickly. Not everyone's going to make that transition as quickly,
mhm,
and between that step A and B, there's a lot there.
mhm.
How does one even admit that they need help? A lot of people
Yeah.
have we struggle with that.
Mhm,
And you shared that there was a lot of shame. My God, what kind of mom am I? I can't even go
mhm,
down and check on my kids.
mhm,
Just that step where you talk about these steps you made, but just those little incremental steps in and of themselves is people need to know, people need to hear.
mhm.
So I think you're doing an just an amazing service by just sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I share it, because I'm like, you know what? Like, I know what's possible, and I know where people are. I know those feelings. I know that place, and I know we don't need to stay there forever. I know we can have a beautiful life even though something horrible has happened. And so I just want people to know that. I want people to know that if you have PTSD, you're not broken, and it's not a life sentence. I know if your child dies, you'll grieve for the rest of your life. But if you do the grief work, and you do the work, then you can still have a beautiful life. It doesn't mean you're forgetting your child. Healing doesn't mean you're moving on, or you're forgetting them, but it means that you blended grief into part of who you are. And it's allowing grief to be there along with happiness. It's allowing, even my triggers that I still have, I'm constantly still working at them. I'm still like, I feel really blessed to be where I'm at. But I still have a little, like moments where I'd be like worried about my kids in their sleep. But it's nothing like I can live, I can function, I'm every day, I can be by myself with my kids. So it's just, I don't know, just I want people to know what's possible. And there's a great quote. So we were saying about the time, it takes some people a long time. And I think people always say that, like, grieve in whatever way you want. And we all take our own time in grief, which is true. But if I can encourage somebody to dive into their grief faster, like, not that they're going faster through their grief, but to dive into doing the work of their grief faster, rather than waiting 10 years to grieve that heavy grief, or to deal with the trauma. Their quality of life can be so much better
Mm,
if they start sooner, rather than 10 years down the road, like, oh my goodness, this is not going away, and I am tired of living this way, so now I'm going to do something about it.
right.
I would rather support people sooner in their grief journey or trauma journey, that they can heal. And there's this quote that time doesn't matter. The amount of time that passes doesn't matter. Time passes no matter what, but it's what we do with the time that we have that matters. So each person has to decide for themselves if they're going to do the work and if they're going to get help. And I can't convince anybody to do something. They have to decide for themselves. So
Oh. Megan, do you have any go-to book recommendations or resources? I mean, I'll have your podcast listed up at the show notes page and your website, et cetera. Just share with our listeners before you share a book, et cetera, what the name of your podcast is.
The Cultivated Family Podcast. And then
Okay.
my website is meganhillukka.com. And then I'm
Okay.
Cultivated Family on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of any book recommendations, whether, trauma related or not, or grieving related or not, anything that you've been reading that's been inspiring that you think might?
Yeah, I have two that I love. So The Body Keeps the Score.
Okay.
That book is like, I was reading it and it's really, so if you're like somebody who has experienced trauma, it might be a little bit more difficult to read because it's super thick and it's really like, I feel like it's super in depth. And so it's probably, I don't know, I feel like it's super helpful to try understand trauma. And so much of what I was reading, I was like, it like got me to my core. Like I understand. And it helps bring in that trauma is not like, I feel like it's something that's our whole body, like our whole body experience needs to be dealt with. It's not just talking it out or just doing this, but like combining everything together. Or like just medication. Like I feel like the book just dives so deeply into that. And I loved that book. And then the other book was The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And that one came up in my therapy session because I think something that has happened to me through this whole journey is I have always talked really horribly to myself. And I didn't realize I was a perfectionist or like trying to put on a front or try to be perfect or whatever. But in my therapy sessions that came out. And so my therapist recommended The Gifts of Imperfection. And that book was just, I feel like it opened my eyes to so many ways of how I was beating myself up and how we can, if we want to have more love in our lives or more joy in our lives, we also have to feel the pain and the sadness and the horrible, difficult parts where we label as bad. We have to feel that, all those things in order to be able to have joy and laughter and life. So I feel like that book really brought that home to me and to start focusing in on myself and noticing what's going on in my own brain and body.
Awesome. So that's The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown and The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. We'll have those along with Megan's website and podcasts up at the show notes page at traumatherapistpodcast.com. Megan, man, I want to thank you for coming on here. Seriously.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, you're beyond inspiring, really. I talk to a lot of people and I know I say that, but you're an amazing person. And I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your story.
Thanks for saying that. I don't really feel inspiring, but I'll keep going. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too.